You're listening to the Fanalist Podcast. Follow on Twitter at TheFanalystPod.
Welcome to the Fanalist Podcast. I'm Andrew alongside Tyson today, and we're talking about a whole bunch of great stuff that's going on right now. NHL Expansion news was released today. We're going to break down a little bit of the NFC East in the NFL. Miami Marlins having some struggles with one of their star players, and history being made by Ichiro Suzuki. We'll get to more on that, as well as the US Open coming up at the end of the week. We'll talk about that event and cap it off with UFC Fight Night Ottawa. Lots of Canadians on the card, so we'll certainly want to get, Tyson's point of view for some of those. But last night, Game 5 NBA Finals, Cleveland Cavaliers, Golden State Warriors, and there was a 15-point victory in favor of the Cavs, extending this one to a Game 6. Tyson, is this what you expected?
When Draymond Green was officially suspended, I had a feeling that LeBron James would finally be able to come into his own and take over the game. And he was. However, Kyrie Irving was happily able to join the ride on that. And you could tell that there was a missing link for the Golden State Warriors. Without Draymond, they just weren't able to stop LeBron. And LeBron, all series long, we've been waiting on him to be that superstar that he is. He's had some moments, he's looked good in games, but Game 4, where was he in the fourth quarter?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, last night, there was no question where him or Kyrie Irving were. A historic performance, both of them putting up 40 points, something that's never been done in the NBA Finals in any game. And for it to happen right now in an elimination game, that is so clutch. Kyrie Irving probably had the best game of his career. Not probably, he did have the best game of his career. And LeBron James, this is going to be up there on that list, especially if this is where the momentum shift comes and they can take the next one at home.
Absolutely. You could argue that this was the most important win of LeBron's career. I mean, bottom line, they had to win, because if they lost, the series over. But now they go to Cleveland, where they can possibly shift the momentum their way if they get a big win in that Game 6.
Yeah, it's going to be something to watch. You can't miss basketball right now. Golden State Warriors, the best team of all time, and LeBron James, arguably one of the best of all time, just not letting back. He's going to have some repeat performances. He's going to have to keep this up if they're going to do this. Draymond Green is coming back, and unless he goes and does something stupid again, this one is going to be over.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning into the Fanalist Podcast. I'm Tyson, and you can follow us at TheFanalystPod.
Big news today out of the NHL. The executive committee voted unanimously in favor of having a franchise in Las Vegas. The team will play at T-Mobile Arena. That seats 17,500. Now, 13,200 season tickets have already been sold or secured or reserved, whatever it is that they figured out. And the league is just waiting on a $500 million fee to progress things forward. And you know what? As great as that sounds, that's the way I read the headline as well. But there's still one more vote to go through before this is permanent. And that's going to be a Board of Governors meeting. It's going to take just before the NHL awards on June 22nd. And they're going to need a 2/3 majority in order to, pass along the approval of Las Vegas joining the NHL.
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue that this is a great business decision by the NHL. I mean, this is going to bring in millions and millions of dollars. So and plus, when you look at the Western Conference, they only have 14 teams. The East currently has 16. I can't see any teams from the East relocating. I think this is the right move.
Yeah, they're rumored to be called the Las Vegas Black Knights, which I kind of like. It's named after the sports and entertainment company that will own the franchise. And they're going to be playing in the Pacific Division, if everything goes as planned, as soon as the 2017-2018 season. This leaves the NHL with 31 teams, though. It's an uneven number and uneven conferences. 15 in the West, 16 in the East, 3 8-team divisions, and still 1 7-team division. So I still kind of think it's likely that Seattle might get a franchise. There might be some more news that hasn't got out yet. Maybe there's talks about that. Maybe it will come a few years later. But also Quebec And I'm sure if Quebec joins the NHL, they'll be in the Eastern Conference and they'll shift a team back over. Maybe Detroit goes back to the West. Maybe they find someone else who it makes sense for. But nonetheless, do you think you'd prefer there to be 2 teams joining now, or are you fine with having 2 of these extra expansion drafts, over a 3-year period?
I don't really have a problem with having maybe a team join later on, but I can definitely see that happening. Seattle is definitely a location that the NHL has been interested in. They've shown interest over the last few years. I can see that happening over the next 5-10 years at most. But yeah, I don't have an issue with them having another team join later on rather than right now. I don't think it's that important.
My OCD will not like a 31-team league. Something about not having that round number is going to bother me a lot. And I think, this is something I haven't heard from anyone else, but I think they might try and keep Quebec open just because if it comes to the point where you need to relocate a team. The Carolina Hurricanes, there's always been talk that something that might not work out. And even recently, there's been some more news that things are not steady. The Arizona Coyotes, you never know what's going to happen there. And as far as the other teams go, a lot of them are in markets in the U.S. that just hockey doesn't quite sell as much as the other major sports. I feel like Quebec would kind of be a safe option to leave open in case a team needs to relocate in the future.
Absolutely. And how many times have we heard Quebec being a huge possibility in the next few years? I mean, a few years ago, they were saying it's going to happen. It's going to happen now. And obviously, it just hasn't developed that way. But also another option would be another team in Toronto. How many times have we heard that as well?
That would be a great option. There's a lot of places in the greater Toronto area that would be great hosts to a team. Whether you would keep them probably under the name Toronto, it would be like New York having 2 franchises. You could probably, put a Toronto team in Markham or Mississauga or something. It's going to sell. The Leafs do not have a problem selling out. Their tickets are expensive and a lot of people cannot afford them. If a new franchise comes in, and there's no way they're going to drop ticket prices significantly, but if they're just a little bit lower, there's going to be a lot of fan support. And I mean, the only problem is that if you want a Toronto franchise right now, I'd do it quick, because if you wait for another 5-10 years, this Maple Leafs franchise might be a little more improved, and it's going to be a little harder to convince fans to, jump off ship.
Right. And why is there 3 teams in California, 3 teams in New York, and 2 teams in Florida, and only 2 teams in Ontario? Ontario being obviously a much bigger force in terms of fans in the area. I mean, Florida, there's no real reason to have 2 teams there. New York, you can kind of understand it, but California as well, it's kind of like, why? I mean, their fan bases have been doing well just because their team's success over the last few decades. But overall, I mean, it would make a lot of sense.
I would even make an argument for Western Canada. I mean, if those teams were playing significantly better, if the Canucks, the Oilers, and the Flames specifically, were doing a little bit more in the postseason, as we saw this year, no Canadian team really did anything. But if there was a lot more success out West, I think there'd be a demand for another team. I don't know quite where you would put them, but it's not that hard to sell hockey in Canada. There is a ton of junior hockey that, maybe doesn't sell out, but it's popular across the country. And I think the NHL would be stupid not to, at least get another team into Canada in the next few years. I know you want to grow the sport elsewhere, but why not just sell tickets where it's easy to do so?
You look at the NFL, I mean, you got a city like Green Bay being the most historic franchise, and that's just a small city in Wisconsin. But the problem with that is, you can't have that in the NHL because, first of all, it's not nearly as big as the NFL. The NHL needs to make money, so they make decisions to go to places like Las Vegas where, there isn't that much interest that there would be in, northern Canada, or western Canada, but at the end of the day, it's going to make them a lot more money.
Hotels are going to buy tickets. People are going to go on vacations to go visit their team in Las Vegas. It's really a win-win for Las Vegas itself and for the team that's moving there. What will be most interesting, though, is seeing how younger players cope with a lifestyle in Las Vegas, especially when you get stuck there for, a 10-game homestead and you want to go out and have some fun. There's a lot of stuff in Vegas to do to get yourself in trouble. And, we hear about a lot of players in the NHL finding trouble wherever they go. Las Vegas might just spark a little bit more. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at TheFanalystPod, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and like our page on Facebook. Tyson, let's talk about the NFC East. There's some news that came out today about Darren McFadden. He underwent surgery on a broken elbow, making it even more likely that Ezekiel Elliott is going to have a significant amount of reps this season. Where do you have Dallas Cowboys ranked in your NFC East as of now?
I have them number one. I have them number one, just a bit ahead of the New York Giants, just because of the free agency moves that the Giants have made so far in the offseason. They've looked to develop a better defense. Obviously, we'll have to see how it pans out in the regular season. But in terms of the Dallas Cowboys, I think a lot of people are just going overboard on the fact that they had a 4-12 season last year. Look at how many injuries they had. I mean, Tony Romo was out for most of the year. When he came back, he shouldn't have. And Des Bryant, obviously, a huge factor. Losing DeMarco Murray is definitely, it hurts. But at the end of the day, like you said, you got Ezekiel Elliott as a great option for your running back.
Yeah, DeMarco Murray was gone last year as well, but because the team was injured, there's kind of been, the Dallas Cowboys have just been on pause, for a year. Of course, they were probably relying on Darren McFadden to be a more significant option this year, but the opportunities opened for Ezekiel Elliott. That whole offense relies on having a strong running back, and I think Ezekiel Elliott is going to fit in quite nicely there. Of course, we've seen guys before jump into the NFL and just not be ready. Is that possible? Of course. I'm not going to be here to tell you that, some unproven rookie who's never played a game in the NFL is going to suddenly totally sweep things away. But he's definitely an early nomination for Rookie of the Year. If you just had to, simulate the season in your mind and assume how things are going to go, I have the Cowboys 12-4, completely reversing that record last year. When Tony Romo played, he was 3-1. So 4 victories last year. Romo won 3 of those. Just goes to show that when he wasn't around, that explains why they went 1-11 with backups. I think the Cowboys are going to turn things around. But unlike you, number 2 in this division, I have the Washington Redskins at 9-7.
I can't completely disagree because it is the NFC East, and we've seen Eli Manning have his fair share of troubles, but I mean, the guy bounces back pretty well, and he didn't have the strongest year last year, the last few years, 6-10, 2 years in a row. But I think they're on the right track to have major improvements, and maybe the new head coach in the locker room is just what they need, kind of shake things up a little bit. Sure, Eli, he's same old Eli. He throws a lot of interceptions, and, he hasn't proven to be that great quarterback that a 2-ring Super Bowl champion would suggest. But at the end of the day, Odell Beckham Jr. as your main wide receiver, and like I said, improvements on defense, I like where they're heading. And I would have them ahead of the Washington Redskins simply because, sure, Kirk Cousins didn't have a bad season last year. I don't think he can repeat and have an even better year.
That's fair with Kirk, that maybe he can't repeat exactly what he did. My point of view with the Giants is I think they are going to improve. I don't think they're going to fall off it by any means, any more than 6-10, which, as you mentioned, they've done that 2 years in a row. I feel like, the additions they've made to defense and what they've done overall is enough to project them to 8-8. That's what I have them at for next season. Washington Redskins, they're the defending division champs. I'm giving them some respect. I think that they have a few pieces there that people are forgetting about. Josh Norman just came over and is going to be the cornerback there. He's going to be lining up against Odell Beckham Jr. and a whole bunch of others, and they have a pretty favorable schedule. Not as favorable as the Giants, actually. The Giants are tied for 30th in terms of strength of schedule, while the Redskins have the hardest in the division at 17, Eagles 26th in difficulty, and Cowboys 27th. So the whole division kind of hanging out around that number. But, I have the Redskins at 9-7. I think that they're going to be able to repeat a little bit of what they did last year. Deshaun Jackson, he's a bit of an arse to play with, but he's still a great wide receiver. He's going to be all right. And Kirk, you like that? You like that Cousins? I think he can, keep it up a little bit. He might not improve. He might not stay the same, but I don't think he's going to fall off quite as much as some people think.
My only issue with the Washington Redskins, though, is the reason why they made the playoffs last year is because every team in the NFC East fell off the face of the planet. When New York needed to step up, they went way down. Philadelphia, they were, let's be honest, a pile of crap all year long with all the issues on and off the field. Chip Kelly, not knowing if that guy's a madman or some genius before the season started, and then we found out that he was actually a madman. And then the Dallas Cowboys with all the injuries they made. Washington was able to step up. I mean, a 9-7 record winning a division, not a good division. And I think that they took advantage of the fact that teams in the NFC East were not doing nearly as well as they should have. And with wins against those teams down the stretch, I mean, their game against Philadelphia, the last game of the season, was maybe the worst possible game I've ever seen played. I mean, neither of those teams deserved to get into the playoffs after that game, and look what happened.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to stick with my Redskins, though. You'll stick with your Giants. Maybe we'll place a little wager on this one, and one of us will be celebrating at the end of the season. Something that we obviously both agree on is, the crappiness of the Philadelphia Eagles. Sadly, the team that I'm a fan of. And despite them spending so much money this offseason, including today announced a 6-year contract extension with Pro Bowl defensive lineman Fletcher Cox, the Eagles still have some major holes that have me doubting the type of impact they can actually make in the NFC East. I mean, their quarterbacks, Sam Bradford, unproven, he hasn't been a great team guy. Chase Daniels, past his prime. Carson Wentz, he needs some time to hang around in the NFL before you can throw him in there. At running back, Ryan Matthews and Darren Sproles. I don't really see a premier running back there. I see a guy like Darren Sproles who's probably going to return a touchdown once or twice throughout the year.
Great special teams return.
Player. Yeah, of course. But I mean, if they don't have that guy, right? You need somebody. You need somebody to step up and, lead the charge there, on the ground, especially if you have a weaker arm.
You need a LaShawn McCoy. Oh, gee whiz, what happened there?
Or DeMarco Murray.
That's true, but I mean, DeMarco obviously didn't run well in Chip Kelly's offense. So
Chip Kelly's gone now, so who knows how things would have gone. But nonetheless, even a wide receiver, Jordan Matthews, and speaking of drama, Nelson Aguilar. There was some news that came out this past week as well that he allegedly was involved with an altercation with a exotic dancer, and I'll leave it at that. Some suspicion that there was a rape that took place, and there's going to be a lot of discussion about that. Who knows if he'll be with the team when we get back into, the swing of things in August. Everyone's headed home from OTAs until training camp. But I mean, it's just the Eagles. There's always a problem. It was Riley Cooper a few years ago and Deshaun Jackson before he left. They got nothing for Deshaun Jackson, and look what he did last season. He won the division with, the Redskins. So definitely not the way the Eagles fans want things to go. I'd rather be telling you that I think they'll win this division, but I can't say that while taking myself seriously at all. I'm going to go Cowboys, Redskins, Giants, Eagles, and I have those Eagles at 6-10. Thanks for tuning into the Fanalist Podcast. I'm Andrew, and you can follow us at TheFanalystPod. So last night, to many people's surprise, Giancarlo Stanton was benched. And until I found out that, I didn't notice just how much he's been struggling this season. Looking at Giancarlo Stanton in the past 30 days, among all the other players in the MLB, he actually ranks last right now in weighted runs created plus, which is a metric that shows a lot of things. And when you're last in it, it shows you're really struggling. He's averaged 111. He has an OBP of 191. And a slugging percentage of 210, and then a K percentage, he strikes out 43.3% of the time. Now, you don't have to be, all in on the analytics when it comes to MLB to understand that you cannot be striking out 43% of the time. It's just, there's no sign of things getting better. They had to bench him. Don Mattingly trying to send a message, but I don't think it's really about sending a message. Giancarlo Stanton just needs to kind of figure things out. I don't know if it's that he's batting scared or what it is, but things are not going well right now. Last season, he was among the top 10 in the league with an OBP of 952. Hanging out with guys like Bryce Harper, Joey Votto, Mike Trout, Miguel Cabrera, the best in baseball. Now he's on a list of struggling players with Trevor Plouffe, Gerardo Parra, Alcides Escobar, Yadier Molina. There's a few surprises in that list, but they're all doing significantly better than Giancarlo Stanton. He's dead last right now, and, things are not looking good for the Marlins. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at TheFanalystPod, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and like our page on Facebook. In place of Stanton last night was Ichiro Suzuki, the 42-year-old who looks a lot more like a teenager. For him, it's been quite the career, a Hall of Fame career for sure. And something that was very interesting, something that's not getting very much press at all, is that if you include Ichiro's time playing in Japan, He's actually one hit away from Pete Rose for all-time hits in professional baseball. Except people aren't really looking at your time in Japan as a very worthy, credible time. You're playing obviously lower competition, but it's still professional baseball. So there's a lot of discussion whether it should count or not. There's a lot of executives, coaches, and different trainers that believe Ichiro should be getting credit for the time he spent in Nippon Professional Baseball League. I think that's what it's called in Japan. I don't know if you can confirm that, Tyson, but
well, I mean, not knowing what the name of the league is, I think adds to the argument.
I think you make a great point there. The NPBL, I think maybe I've heard that one more often, but still not quite ringing a bell for me. But I think Pete Rose might have said it best. And usually he always has something great to say. But, he told USA Today reporter, I found a quote here, it sounds like in Japan, they're trying to make me the hit queen. I'm not trying to take anything away from Ichiro. He's had a Hall of Fame career, but the next thing you know, they'll be counting his high school hits. Why do you think it's such a non-story, at least? Because I think it's worth discussing. I think it's worth, a little bit of coverage among baseball people. Like, if you're a fan of the game, you give Ichiro some credit. Don't crown him the overall professional baseball hits leader. But I mean, isn't it, do you give Ichiro credit? He still ranks among the best.
I do, but at the same time, I can't say that what he's done is better than Pete Rose, or you can't even compare the two, really. Sure, he did spend time in Japan where it is professional baseball, but you compare Japan's pitchers and players in general to the talent there is in the MLB, it's not even close. The best guys there, probably just mediocre in MLB. I mean, that's just the fact of it all. I think he deserves more recognition from the fans for being a great player and an all-time great overall. But in terms of comparing him to Pete Rose, I think that's just ridiculous.
I don't think it's necessarily ridiculous to compare him to Pete Rose. He's definitely one of the best hitters of all time. Some of the records I pulled, he has quite a few. But just to give you a few here. Most hits in a season, 262. That was in 2004. Most seasons with 200 or more hits. He did that 10 consecutive years, from 2001 to 2010. Most consecutive stolen bases with no caught stealing. So he wasn't caught stealing in 45 straight attempts. And he's recorded the only inside the park home run in MLB All-Star Game history. If you remember back in 2007 at AT&T Park in San Francisco off Chris Young, he did do that. The first and only inside the park home run. But I think when you look at a guy like Ichiro, what it reminds me is, in the NHL, Jaromir Jagr, a similar guy who, when you look at the all-time leaders in goals, it's Wayne Gretzky with 894, the late Gordie Howe, who actually just had a service today for what happened. So rest in peace, Gordie Howe, and blessings with your family. But ranked third is Jaromir Jagr with 749 goals. And if you include his time in the KHL, he's at 822. Only 72 behind Gretzky. And if you look at points, again, Gretzky leading 2,857. Jagr with 1,868. Now include his time in the KHL. He is 2,033, which leapfrogs him over number 2 Mark Messier and has him as the number 2 point getter in professional hockey history. At least Jagr will always have his 133 game-winning goals, 15 more than Phil Esposito, 36 ahead of Jarome Iginla. But maybe Ovechkin can catch him. He's only 45 back and 30 years old.
That's the all-time question when you have guys who don't compete in the NHL or the MLB full-time. When they go out overseas and do what Suzuki and Jagr did, there's always going to be a question mark. If they stayed in their respective league, would they be on top of the all-time list? So one guy that I think of when you bring a subject like this up is Fedor Emelianenko in the MMA. He's arguably one of the greatest of all time, but he had never fought in the UFC. He might soon. I mean, there's arguments of whether or not he's going to sign with the UFC in the next coming months, but in his prime, it was only in Pride, a Japan organization that for a while was considered one of the biggest organizations in MMA. However, UFC, a lot bigger. And when he went to America to fight for Strikeforce, he wasn't fighting the best caliber guys, and he ended up losing a few times. So there's always that question mark as to whether or not he is or not, because you look at Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, all they did was fight in the UFC. Anderson a little bit in Pride, but mostly in his prime, he was in the UFC for all of his fights. So that just kind of reminded me of the whole Suzuki and Yager situation. It's pretty similar.
Yeah, it definitely is very similar. I guess if you have one tip to give to players as they join, at least the major sports leagues, as well as they join the UFC, if you want to have your name in the record books and you're planning on being a great, make sure you stay here and do it. Don't go elsewhere, because we're not going to give you the same recognition. We're not going to give you free points on our standings because of what you did somewhere else. It's just not the way it is.
Right. And another thing with MMA is, with all this talk in free agency as of late with the Reebok deal, and a lot of fighters considering going to other organizations like Bellator for more money, you got great fighters like Benson Henderson and Alistair Overeem who are considering it. Alistair actually stayed with UFC, but it always brings up the question, well, if you go there and you're a champion there, you're not going to be looked nearly the same as if you're a champion at the UFC. So sure, you're getting more money, but most of the guys are fighting because they want to be champions and they want to be recognized as all-time greats. Nobody's going to consider you an all-time great if you're a champion in any other organization other than the UFC.
Well, this is going to be easy. Since we're already talking about UFC, how about Fight Night Ottawa this weekend, Tyson? Lots of Canadians on the card. What fights are you looking forward to the most?
There are 3 fights on this card really that spark my eye. I mean, overall, the card is pretty interesting, but I mean, when you're talking about which ones are the most significant in respective divisions, it's Joanne Calderwood versus Valerie Letourneau, Patrick Cote against Donald Cerrone, and probably my all-time favorite for the year, Rory McDonald versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson.
A few Canadians to get to. Let's start with Valerie Letourneau fighting in the first ever flyweight fight.
It's interesting because the UFC has for a long time considered expanding into more divisions, specifically with men, but also with women, with the possibility of having a 145 division with Cyborg potentially coming to the UFC full-time. Is there a need for that? Maybe, maybe not. And then the flyweight division, which a lot of women between 115 and 135 have said, hey, if there's a 125-pound division, I wouldn't mind going up or down. That would be an easier weight class for me. It would suit my game more. And I don't know if it's necessary for the UFC to do it, because I don't know if there's that many fighters that will flock to those divisions, but it's still cool to see that they're interested in it. And having Letourneau be in the first ever flyweight fight, it's pretty cool that a Canadian is representing her country in that fight. And it's going to be interesting because we haven't seen her fight since her last one against Joanna Jędrzejczyk in the strawweight championship fight in Australia at UFC 193, where, yeah, she lost maybe pretty badly, but at the end of the day, she stood her ground for most of the fight. It wasn't like it was overly uncompetitive. There were some good highlights from Valerie in that fight, and overall it's experience. And she's going to bring that in this fight, I believe. I think she should be the favorite. I have her winning this one by decision, but Calderwood, no matter what, comes to fight, and she proved that in her last one in Scotland last year, where she just basically stood in the pocket and banged, and she got knocked around pretty good, but she got right back up and was able to win that fight. So I think it's going to be a very exciting one.
Now in the UFC, it's all about winning the title. Now, of course, it being the debut fight for the flyweight division, they're not going to give a title away, immediately. How long do you think it's going to take before they choose to have a title fight?
Well, it all depends if the UFC is going to decide whether they're going to create a flyweight division or not. This is just, I guess, a test maybe, like they've kind of done with the featherweight division for women, having Cyborg fight against Leslie Smith. It was at 140, but that was kind of their test to see, is there interest in a 145-pound division? And I think there very well is, seeing how much publicity that Cyborg fight got. Obviously, there's not going to be as much interest in 125, but if they believe it works, then maybe in the next year or two they could open that division up. But I think for now it's just testing their waters, putting their foot in.
Make sure you follow us on Twitter at TheFanalystPod, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and like our page on Facebook. And in the co-main event, we have veteran Canadian Patrick Cote, who's taking on Donald Cerrone. How do you feel about this fight?
I like it because both fighters are going to go in there having one thing in mind, and that is finish him. And Patrick Cote, he's looked very good in his last few fights. He's a big 170, and We're talking about Donald Cerrone, who's just starting to come into the welterweight division. He doesn't have to cut much weight at all. Cote, on the other hand, he probably has to cut a fair bit. I mean, he was a highly competitive 185er back in the day. He famously fought Anderson Silva for the middleweight title back in the day, and although he lost, he was still very good in that division. So it's translated pretty well at 170. But I think when it comes to Donald Cerrone, he's just too much for Patrick Cote. He's much better at standing up, and it's not going to go to the ground. But Cerrone, I think, is a little bit more well-rounded than Cote is, and Cote is old. Let's be honest, and Cerrone, he definitely has miles on him. But if we're looking at guys who can possibly contend, I think Cerrone, with this win, could launch himself maybe in the top 15 in the welterweight division, and possibly, who knows, compete against the higher-ranked guys in that division later on.
After seeing how some of the other fighters react to playing in their home countries, Patrick Cote, of course, a veteran, might not be around for too much longer. How special do you think it is for him to be able to fight in Ottawa?
It should be pretty exciting for him. I mean, his last fight was in Saskatoon, where he ended up winning by knockout. And I'm sure whenever you fight in your home country and you win, and especially in a way where you knock the guy out, it must be just absolutely thrilling. So this will most likely be a great moment for him. But like I said, I think Cerrone is just going to be too much.
Hopefully in the nation's capital, this whole event is going to get a little bit more press. There's been some great stuff being done by Canadian athletes the last few weeks, or even most recently, Brooke Henderson on the LPGA Tour. A more niche sport getting some attention. The UFC doesn't always make major headlines, especially not in Canada. How do you think this one, and we're going to get to the main event in just a moment, you can talk more about that one, a very special Canadian taking part. How do you think, Canada's going to embrace this fight? Do you think that it's going to help being in Ottawa? Do you feel like the sport's growing enough now that it might just get a little extra attention?
Well, with George St. Pierre, the sport escalated so much in Canada. I mean, you look at what he did in Toronto, where he sold out the Rogers Centre in a matter of hours.
He certainly put Canada on the map.
And he also showed Canadians the UFC in general. I mean, I don't think many people knew the UFC back in those days, but with him fighting and being the great champion that he was, a lot more people sort of understood the sport, and since then have sort of come to it. I mean, this fight in Ottawa, just a non-title fight, sold out in a matter of I believe hours. So it's definitely successful, and even without George St. Pierre, I think the future's bright when you have a guy like Rory MacDonald who's fighting in the main event. That guy's got unbelievable potential.
You brought him up. Let's get right to the main event. Rory MacDonald, tell me who he's fighting and tell me what's going to happen.
All right. Well, he's fighting Stephen Thompson, who right now looks like the biggest savage in that division. When he beat Johnny Hendricks, I think most people were shocked. And not that he beat him, but the fact that he beat him by knockout, and even more so the fact that he beat him in the first round. Johnny Hendricks, to that point, had never been finished before, and to that point, had never looked like a pedestrian. I mean, the fact that Stephen Thompson was able to go in there and really make Johnny Hendricks look like an amateur. Hendricks, for the first few minutes, looked like he was, all right, same old Johnny Hendricks, goes for the takedown, doesn't work. He's getting hit a bit, but at the same time, we kind of expect him to grind it out, maybe take Wonder Boy down later on. But instead, Wonder Boy was just teasing him, just jabbing him, hitting him with kicks that we've never seen Johnny get hit by before, and affect him in the way that Stephen Thompson was affecting him. So this is going to be the toughest matchup of Stephen Thompson's career in Rory MacDonald, just because of how well-rounded Rory MacDonald is. And when you consider the fact that Johnny Hendricks is a great wrestler, people don't understand that, yeah, he was an unbelievable college wrestler, but that doesn't translate that well into mixed martial arts. Rory MacDonald, if he was in college wrestling, there's no way he would stand a chance, especially against a guy like to the caliber of Johnny Hendricks. But when it comes to mixed martial arts, his wrestling, some might consider better. And that is definitely an issue for Stephen Thompson, because I believe if Rory gets to the ground, which I believe he will, he'll take over. And it's so hard to go against Thompson after seeing what he did to Johnny Hendricks and seeing the potential that guy has. I still have Rory MacDonald as a favorite.
So do you believe that the winner of this one will actually get a chance at a title fight?
The only thing that would make me suggest otherwise is if Rory does win, and let's say Robbie Lawler ends up winning against Tyron Woodley in their fight in UFC 201. I think they might give it to Damian Maia. However, I mean, we saw what happened at UFC 189 when Robbie Lawler fought Rory McDonald. One of the greatest fights I've ever seen in my life. In my opinion, it is the best fight I've ever seen in my life. So I think there is a need to see that rematch happen. But the problem is with that, Rory's lost twice to Robbie now. And, I mean, a third time, obviously, where do you go from there? But at this point, do you do that rematch, or do you maybe put Damian Maia, who's looked amazing as well? But I think it's undeniable if Stephen Thompson wins to not give him that shot. I mean, if he beats Rory McDonald, there's no one else to beat. He's the guy to fight for the title next.
3 great fights for 3 great Canadians, all in the nation capital this weekend. We'll see how things pan out, but for sure, going to be a special event in Ottawa, and all the best to the fighters. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at TheFanalystPod, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and like our page on Facebook. Now, Tyson, U.S. Open is this weekend. Oakmont, we've been talking about it. I can't stop following the news and seeing what's going on. Why don't you start things off with telling me which golfer, if you only had to pick one, that you thought could win at Oakmont this year, who would it be?
My pick would be Jordan Spieth because of the way he's played lately and, well, the fact that he won last year. The guy showed that he can play under tough conditions. Chambers Bay, ridiculous conditions, really. I mean, I don't know if you can just call it tough. It was just kind of silly, some of the conditions that we saw that year. But at the end of the day, when I look at who I see as favorites going into U.S. Open week, I first look at how they've done in majors overall, how they've done lately, but specifically how they've done at the U.S. Open in the past. You know, it's very rare we see guys succeed in a U.S. Open where they haven't had much success in previous ones.
Well, I mean, these are the toughest courses. That's the best thing about the U.S. Open is it's never going to be easy. That's why I'm really kind of, you know, when I look at players that are a little bit deeper in the field, I'm trying to temper my expectations. There's a lot of guys down there that I'd love to see win, some that I actually think will compete. But I really think that this tournament is going to belong to the top players. Guys like Spieth, Rory, and Day are all going to finish in the top 10, in my opinion. They did so last year at Chambers Bay, and it's one of those courses where the best players are going to win because you have to be the best in order to learn how to tame the course. You said Jordan Spieth, somebody who you thought was going to have a great chance this week. I would not be surprised at all if he wins. I'd be very surprised, though, if he's outside of contention when Sunday comes along. I think he's been preparing for this course ever since the Masters, when he had that very not so glorious moment of putting the green jacket on Danny Willett. I think he really wants to back up this one, and he might have got even more hungry after that, after what took place at the Masters. If I had to, give you my one guy, the one guy who I think is going to win, I'm going to go way off the board with this one, okay? World number 1, Jason Day. Did I say way off the board? I meant right to the top of the board. World number 1, Jason Day. He's simply been the best golfer in the last 5 U.S. Opens, and this season already, he won at the Players, he won at the Arnold Palmer Invitational, and he won at the Match Play. See, the pressures of Match Play, I think, fit this course nicely. You never want to create an opening for your opponent, and you want to let your strengths do the winning for you. You know when to take your chances, but play cautiously enough to avoid falling behind. I think that's going to be really important here because you have to hit the fairways. We mentioned in our podcast yesterday how we were talking about on Ricky Fowler's Snapchat. He was throwing golf balls into the rough, and the ball was just disappearing. And a lot of the players have commented on that, how consistent the rough is throughout the entire course. No matter what, the grains for the rough are straight up. No matter where your ball goes in, it's dropping right to the bottom. You're going to have a very lofted iron in order to get out of that rough. And if you can't hit the fairway on some of these long par 5s, you're busted.
Absolutely. And I mean, Jason Day's a great argument to be made for being the favorite in this tournament this week. You look at the way he's played this year, obviously being the number 1 player in the world and the success he's had in U.S. Opens before. The T2 he had at Marion in 2013. And then you look at another top 10 finish last year where who knows what would happen if he didn't have that head trauma that he suffered early in the week. I mean, we might be looking at the defending U.S. Open champion.
Yeah, that vertigo really interfered with his last couple days. He did finish pretty strong, but who knows what he could have done earlier if that wasn't bothering him. Another guy, Rory McIlroy, one of the, number 3 golfer in the world right now. It's crazy. I had to think how far, usually when you're thinking Rory McIlroy, you're just thinking the top of the list, but he's fallen down to number 3. And for sure, he's going to be here. He's trying to win his US Open, and he's trying really hard. He's going to finish in the top 10. I don't think he's going to get it done. I just feel like one of these other guys, I think really Spieth or Day would be my top guys. I have a few more picks that I'll get to once I let you comment on Rory.
You know what? I don't know if I can trust Rory to be in the top 10 this week. I feel like he's more of a mystery heading into this US Open than he has been in past years, where he's looked great heading into the US Open and, in my opinion, should be a favorite for every year. This time around, I can't picture him being in the mix in terms of being in the top 5. Top 10, maybe. I have him outside, though. I think outside top 15.
Nobody hits the ball as pure as Rory does, and that's going to be such a key this week, making sure you're hitting those fairways and you're getting enough distance. And, maybe the next guy who drives the ball just as well as Rory would be Adam Scott, someone who's kind of off the radar right now, but he had 2 really huge wins earlier this season, the Honda Classic at PGA National, as well as the WGC Cadillac at Trump National Doral. He's definitely one of the guys who's not getting a lot of talk, but he always seems to wake up for these majors. He's always around. Another guy might be a guy like Louis Oosthuizen, not someone who I'm too confident in, but, like last year when he had that huge Sunday and just came shooting right up the rankings, finished 3rd at the US Open. Those are the kind of guys that I think could really surprise people at this event.
And I have this strange feeling, just a strange feeling, and I'm going to throw it out there, Phil Mickelson. I every year, you wonder, can he break the curse? Can he finally win a U.S. Open? I mean, you look at the past and how close he's been so many times and not being able to clinch that championship. I feel like this could be the year. And his play hasn't been amazing. It hasn't been that great. But at the end of the day, he's in the top 20 in the FedEx Cup. He has made 10 of 14 cuts. But I think you should never discount him when it comes to the U.S. Open.
Would you say that Phil Mickelson's your dark horse?
Yes.
Okay, because I think it's fair. Some people might be thinking, hey, Phil Mickelson, he always wins things. He can't be your dark horse. But if you follow the PGA as of late, Phil has not been the Phil of old. He's a different guy right now. And
he is old Phil now.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Now he is old Phil, and that's the way it is. If he were in contention, I'd be amazed if he were able to pull it off at this course with so many of these younger players just playing, so incredible, and all these guys that are fighting their way up right now. I could sit here for hours and go through names all the way from where we are now to Danny Willett to Hideki Matsuyama, and the list goes on and on of guys who have so much potential on this tour. But Phil Mickelson's been there before, and if he can find himself in contention, maybe he could get that done. Would not have a problem with seeing Phil win. It would be great for golf. My dark horse, though, is somebody who was part of a little bit of a rivalry with Spieth, and I think it could get reignited this weekend. That's Patrick Reed. The rivalry didn't really last too long, but like I said, if these two kind of end up in a final pairing or close together Saturday, Sunday, something could re-spark here. Reed has failed to get a top 10 in a major thus far, but he's been a top 10 machine on tour throughout all the other events, and he's ranked number 1 in strokes gained around the green. He's got a great game. He's a great player. He's one of my favorites, and, he's my dark horse, and he's also one of those guys who I'm just going to be looking to see every shot of his throughout this tournament. I really hope that he can come out with a great performance. Kind of what he's had trouble with was getting, he'd play really well and really consistent 3 rounds of the week, and then he'd always have that one round that just kind of kept him out, and then he'd have a really big Sunday, and that would kind of drag him back into contention. But he wasn't actually down the stretch for quite a few tournaments. But I really think Patrick Reed this week, I think this could be a huge tournament for him.
One guy we haven't mentioned, though, that is definitely going to be under the spotlight is...
I know exactly who you're going to say.
Dustin Johnson, yeah.
Oh, could you imagine Dustin Johnson with a putt to win it at the end of this tournament?
Let's hope it's within 2 feet.
I'm starting to sweat thinking about it.
Yeah, and I hope he does well, just because I am a fan of him, and it sucks seeing someone go through what he went through last year. I mean, I don't know if he can contend, honestly. I don't know if he can rebound. If I were to pick, though, any guy to rebound after something like that, it's Dustin Johnson, because I honestly don't think, I think he cares, but I think that he's able to brush it aside almost and kind of forget about it.
Next to Jason Day being one of the best guys at the last 5 U.S. Opens, he's the only one who's finished in the top 5 these past 2 years. He's there. He's always at the U.S. Open, and he's going to be he's always trying to win. I feel like it's kind of unfair. It's what happens, though. When you 3-putt on 18 to win the championship, when that's what happens, you're going to get a lot of flack for it. And he's going to continue to get flack for it until he's able to overcome those demons and win. But I do think there's too much being pressure put on him, because at this point, if he were to finish second, even if he plays out of his mind and he comes charging from behind and finishes second, people are going to call it a choke. If he didn't do so bad early in the week, he would have been in contention. If he this, if he that. When it comes to Dustin Johnson right now, if he doesn't get first place, it's like he lost. And that's how golf is. Of course, if you're not first, you're last. But it's not as severe for anyone more than it is for Dustin Johnson.
To this point in his career, I think any major is like that now, with how close he's been and not being able to get it done. 2010, I think, is where it all started. He was doing really well. He had the 54-hole lead in the U.S. Open then, and then just blew up. You could argue that was a choke, but that was his first time really contending and being in that position in a major championship. And then a few months later, you've got PGA Championship, where maybe the worst thing I've ever seen happen to a golfer, where he gets penalized, and where we all thought it was going to be a playoff with him involved, and then realizing that nope, you're outside the top 2, and now you once had a chance to win the tournament. Now all of a sudden you're looking at the television screen, seeing who will host the trophy instead. It's tough. And since then, he's been in contention many, many times, and maybe the worst disaster of his career was last year.
I feel like I'm the evil one doing this, but if I had to write the script for Dustin Johnson this week, I think he's, our first round leader on Thursday. I think he's going to have a great round. He's going to come out and play really well, and then he's going to linger Friday. He's going to linger Saturday, and it's just not going to be enough on Sunday. He might be up there, but I feel like he'll just fall off enough. People will continue to call him a choker, and it's something that's just going to hang over him. And, as a big fan of golf, I love watching Dustin Johnson play. There's something about him. Nobody gets more eagles than Dustin Johnson, okay? He's got to be a fan favorite, because that's what you want to see, right? In basketball, you want to see a guy slam dunk the ball. In football, you want to see a Hail Mary. In hockey, you want to see that incredible deke. With Dustin Johnson, we like seeing those eagles. That's going to be hard at this course, but, I'm hoping the best for DJ. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at TheFanalystPod, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and like our page on Facebook.